As a former broadcast journalist, I'm really thrilled about this program and very interested. Ken Tingley is the quintessential local journalist. One of his early jobs was right here in Plattsburgh on the sports beat for the Press Republican. From there, he worked for various newspapers all around the country, embracing roles like political reporter, columnist, sports editor, and for more than 20 years as editor of the Post-Star in Glens Falls before his retirement in 2020. He was also a consistent advocate for the importance of community newspapers, including serving as the president of the New York State Associated Press Association, member of the board of directors of the American Society of Newspaper Editors. And upon his retirement, the mayor of Glens Falls declared Ken Tingley Day in July of 2020. But Ken was not done with his labors. His latest book, The Last American Newspaper, tells the story of skilled and dedicated professionals facing the changes and challenges of the 21st century for local newspapers. That's financial, political, cultural, and what the loss of these local journalistic institutions can mean to our communities, the loss of thorough, trusted, and objective reporting of local issues and public affairs, the loss of the nonpartisan watchdog on government and political establishments, and the loss of our shared sense of place, especially in rural areas like ours that are in increasing danger, especially in the outlying areas, of becoming news deserts. The book is now available online and in stores and for one day only here at MHAB, but we are so pleased to have Ken here to speak about this increasingly important topic. Ken Tingley.
Thank you so much. This really is kind of a homecoming for me of sorts. I've been talking to a few people today about those early memories in Plattsburgh of arriving here in January 1980, a month before the Winter Olympics, and it was about 0 degrees, and then it went down to about 30 below. For about 2 weeks, I recall at the time. I didn't think I was going to last very long in Plattsburgh, but I ended up staying for 2.5 years. Every Friday night, those of us in the newsroom would go down to Arnie's on Margaret Street and have drink a couple of beers. Inevitably, we'd be stopping at the Monopole for a slice of their great pizza. Do they still have that pizza? Because you go up to the window, and so I miss that maybe more than ever. You've kind of heard a little bit about my background and whatever, and I was the editor of the Post-Star for the last 20 years. I never thought I would leave sports. It was the greatest job in the world. They pay you to go to games, but I found much more satisfaction when I got to the news side. So much so that when I left, I retired in July 2020. I started writing a newsletter, and it's basically a column 3 times a week. It comes directly into your email. My wife Jillian will pass around a clipboard if you'd like to subscribe to it. It's free. It doesn't cost anything. And I address regional issues, local issues, some political issues, and often just tell stories about media and other things. So I hope you'll sign up for that. When I retired, I started working on 2 books simultaneously. One's The Last American Editor. And I really enjoyed, more than any other part of my job, was being a columnist. And the best part about that was finding stories about people in your community. And when I went back and I was looking for the old columns and stories, I was pleasantly surprised that these stories held up. They were about regular people overcoming adversity, facing challenges, just regular people like any of us. And that's a part of the newspaper that I think many of us forget about. We think about what the newspaper does, and we think it's covering the news, it's covering the things that are bad things that are happening in the world, but these were often some of the best things that happen in the world. The other book, The Last American Newspaper, it came out last August. With what I was seeing going on in the world around me and what I experienced as an editor in my final couple of years was very discouraging. And I wanted to remind people of all the great work that newspapers do and how they make a difference in the community. They often lead the discussions about what's going on in the world around us. And that's what we're losing. You're losing some of that already. You're not having as many editorials in the paper, you're not having commentary in the paper, and you're not having those discussions. It's something I think you should be worried about. When I was getting ready to write the book, one of my reporters sent me this quote: "A newspaper is a window through which men look out upon all that is going on in the world. Without a newspaper, a man is shut up in the room and knows little of what is happening outside of himself." Well, that was written over 100 years ago. So yeah, I have to excuse the, leaving out the women. But I think it's just as valuable sentiment today as it was back then. If you're not paying attention to what's going on in the newspaper, you might not be able to make good judgments about what's going on in the world around you. 3 or 4 years before I retired, a woman sent me an email, and she wrote, "Dear Ken, the Post-Star was my father's favorite, and mine too. We put one in the casket so he would have something to read when he got to heaven." That's the status that community newspapers once had. That's how valuable that we once looked at it. If that paper didn't hit the doorstep at 7 in the morning, I was getting phone calls all day long. I want to take a little bit here to talk about one story from The Last American Editor. In September of 2008, I got a phone call from a person I knew in the community and said, "You should go talk to this woman, Erica Perkins. She's really going through a difficult time. She's been diagnosed with MS. She lost her job. Her car isn't running anymore. She's having a hard time getting to her doctor's appointment. She's living in subsidized housing, and she's a single mom." And I said, all right. I went over and I talked to her. And Erica and I sat down, and for a couple hours, we talked about her life. And she was angry. And there was tears and anger, and we talked about all the things that were going on in her life. And I went back to the office and wrote a column. And it started this way. She was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 3 years ago. Every 6 to 7 months, the disease unleashes another wave of attacks on her nervous system, further weakening her stamina and increasing her pain. She lost her job as a private housekeeper. Her left side suffers from regular numbness. She gets double vision in her left eye has constant fatigue. The treatments often leave her violently ill, unable to sleep because of migraines. Osteoporosis has weakened her bones. She's developed nerve disorders that cause immense pain with just a slight touch to her skin. Simply put, she's a mess. So, we write these stories, and it's a heartbreaking story of this young woman. She was 25, 26 at the time. And we put it in the newspaper, and the next morning, the phone rings. And then the first woman says, "Ken, can you give me Erica's contact information? Because there's an MS support group, and I want to take her to it because I think it'll help her." I said, "Okay, I can do that." Phone rang again. There's another woman that says, "Listen, I have some extra time on my hands. Listen, I can take her to her doctor's appointments. I can help her do some errands. I can even babysit for her if that's what she needs." I was like, "Well, yeah, this is great. I'll pass that on." A third call came in. It was from a man who owned a car dealership. And he said, "Listen, I saw this story about the young woman and her car is on the fritz." He said, "Give me your contact information. I'll get her car fixed. I'll put new tires on it. We'll get her back on the road." And this happened all morning long. 5, 6, 7, 8 calls. People, could they donate money? Could they help out? All these things. I kept passing it on, giving them the contact information. It was a reminder, Glens Falls is known as hometown USA. And it was a reminder of that kind of giving that you find in small communities like Plattsburgh and Glens Falls. So when I was writing the book, I wanted to make sure I included this story. And I included part of, at the end of each of the chapters, a PS item which describes what happened to the person afterward. And I hadn't heard from Erica since I wrote that column, not once. And I started looking for her online. I couldn't find her. Couldn't find her on Facebook, couldn't find her on Twitter, couldn't find her anywhere. I finally remembered her daughter had a unique name, Desiree. And I started looking up Desiree's name. And I found Desiree on the honor roll at Queensbury High School. And she had just graduated from high school that year. And I contacted her on her Facebook page. I assured her I was not a stalker. And told her I just was trying to contact her mother and was trying to find out how things had turned out. Well, the MS had gone into remission. New breakthroughs in the drugs had made her life much better. She had actually gotten remarried. It's why I couldn't find her. Her name had changed. And she had 2 more little boys. And I was like thrilled. That's fantastic. So when I did one of my first book signings, I was standing in the back of the store. And all of a sudden I see this young woman kind of walking gingerly in. And you could tell she had braces on her legs. And it was Erica. And she had come to get her book signed and talk to me. And it was a great little reunion. We hadn't seen each other in such a long time. I was so happy to see that she was up and around and living life. And later on that afternoon, I saw this on Facebook. He changed my life, helped me see the good in people around me when all I saw was people judging me. Wow. I was just blown away. I had no idea. It had been like 14 years. And it's just one little column that went in the paper. So I think sometimes even those of us in the industry who worked at newspapers, who did this work, we had no idea of the effect sometimes that the work was having on us. The second book, The Last American Newspaper, I think is even more important to talking about the work that newspapers do to address the problems and improve their communities. We did that repeatedly with all kinds of in-depth and enterprise stories and projects, and it was often hard to know if they made, what kind of impact they made. In February 2005, our editorial page editor, Mark Mahoney, stopped at a Cumberland Farms in Queensbury with the 3 young daughters. I think there were 12 and 9 at the time. And him and his oldest daughter were standing on the front of the store when they saw a car pull in and kind of askew, and it was kind of a commotion outside, and they turned to look, and they at first thought it was an accident, but it wasn't an accident. The car weren't touching or anything. And then they saw a man get out of the car with a long rifle. He walked up to the driver's side of the other car and shot the woman inside to death. It was the man's estranged wife. Our reporters often cover murders, but this is the first time one of our reporters had ever witnessed one firsthand, with his daughters present right beside him. This was obviously a traumatic event in such a public murder happening right in the middle of Glens Falls. The next day, we got together as editors and reporters, and we said, we need to do a story on domestic violence. So how are we going to do that? And we ended up putting a very small brief in the newspaper that just asked for people to come forward and tell us their stories of domestic violence. I want you to consider that for a second. You're asking someone who's been through this horror with a partner, with a husband or wife, and you're asking them to tell their story of this awful thing to a stranger and then have it printed in the newspaper. It seems just ridiculous that anyone would agree to do that. 23 people came forward. 23 people came forward to tell our stories, tell their stories of this abuse. we assigned it to a young reporter named Conrad Marshall. And when I talked to him when I was writing the book, it was amazing. He now is a big deal journalist in Australia, and he could remember the names of the people he talked to. He could remember their circumstances, what their job was, and the terrible things that had happened to him. And it had been like 15 years. So when he was getting ready to do the reporting, he told me, I didn't want to do it in the bustling Post-Star newsroom or at a home. So after most people had gone home, I would come back to the Post-Star and do it in that big empty space. I have vivid recollections of driving in there with virtually no one else there, this big empty room, and listening to people cry. Listening. There was just some wrenching and horrible stuff. So we printed the story, the Conrad story, on 3 consecutive days, which was probably a mistake on our point because the material was so heartbreaking and so horrible, it was almost reader abuse. And right before we were to publish, we realized we had a problem. We didn't have a photograph to go with the story. Now, this is a big thing for a newspaper. You're going to put a story on the front page. You need some kind of art, draw people in, get their attention. And we didn't want to take the pictures of any of the victims because we didn't want to put them at risk. We didn't want to put them in danger, and didn't want to cause embarrassment, whatever. And finally, one of our editors said, maybe there's strength in numbers. And we got down and we called all 23 of the victims, and we asked them if they'd be willing to be part of a group photo with other domestic violence survivors, and that would be published in the newspaper on the front page. And 9 of them said yes. 7 ended up showing. And when I see the photo, it stops me in my tracks. It still does. I find it still so powerful. We shot it in this grove of trees in Crandall Park, and right in the middle of Glens Falls. And if you can take a second, really, look at the body language, look at their faces. I'm just always, I'm trying, what are they thinking? Why are they doing this? And I'm just always inspired by it. And I ultimately come back to, I think it's defiance. They're saying they're done with this. No one should ever have to put up this kind of abuse, and we're living testament that you can survive something like this. Our editorial page editor, Mark Mahoney, who had witnessed that murder, less than a year earlier, less than a mile from where this photo was taken, he was there at the event, and he wrote this in an editorial that Sunday. They are members of an uneasy sisterhood. They smile and talk casually about a darkness few of us will ever know. Though they've never met, a group of domestic violence survivors gathers for a Post-Star photo shoot to share stories as if attending their high school reunion. Only these stories aren't of favorite subjects and first kisses. These are stories of terror, of fearing for their lives at the hands of their spouses, of bare-fisted beatings and murderous fingers gripping their throats, about getting shot at being stalked, and being told that if they ever left, they and their children would be hunted down and killed. It was an extraordinary series, and it pointed out that there was maybe a lot of problems behind all those friendly front porches in Glens Falls. Maybe Hometown USA had just the same amount of problem as other people. Mark concluded the editorial by saying, we hope that this series opens some eyes to the serious and pervasive nature of the problem. We hope that by sharing the stories of the domestic violence survivors, it will encourage more victims to come forward and take action to help themselves and their children. We hope some abusers will recognize themselves in these stories and get the help they need. And we hope that in educating the general public about signs of domestic abuse, fewer people will be able to turn their backs on the problem. I'd like to think that that series, that work, maybe saved some lives, or at least got people to recognize the situation they were in. You know, we get blamed a lot, I think, newspapers, for there's nothing but bad news in the paper. But if a newspaper doesn't shine a light on the problems of a community, who will? And I think that's a question that you all should be asking yourself now, because newspapers continue to erode in terms of resources, and you can tell it if you've got a subscription to the paper. It's smaller and fewer stories these days. But not all the stories are bad. In 2009, and I don't know how many of you know anything about the Pulitzer Prize. It's the top prize given out in journalism. But I can tell you this, small newspapers like the Post-Star don't win Pulitzer Prizes. It just doesn't happen. Well, this was the moment when Mark Mahoney was told that he had won the Pulitzer Prize in 2009 for editorial writing. And if you look at Nancy to the right, her reaction, you can tell, again, Scott Donnelly to the left side, his mouth is dropped open as well. It's a testament to that. This is the coverage of the Pulitzer the next day. The photo on the bottom right, everyone is standing ovation for Mark. And Mark continues to fight the good fight as the editorial page editor of the Gazette in Schenectady. You know, I talked a little bit about how, you know, the work of community newspapers is so personal. The editors are part of the community. We see our readers in the supermarket, and they see us sometimes to our detriment. In 2017, Will Doolittle, who's our projects editor at the time, came into my office and closed the door. Well, that's never a good thing when someone closes the door. Some of you may know of the Doolittle name. His father ran the Adirondack Daily Enterprise for years. Will grew up, actually, working at the newspaper, was editor of the Mullen Telegram for a while before coming to Glens Falls, but had a long career of 30 years or so in Glens Falls. Well, Will definitely had bad news to tell me. He told me that his wife, Bella, who was 59 at the time, had just been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. And that's Will and Bella there. And he told me the doctor who delivered the diagnosis said she had 8 years left, based on the average. Other doctors have said the progression is unpredictable and can be much longer, but they all agree Alzheimer's is fatal and there is no cure. And selfishly, I was really concerned what this meant to me. Am I going to lose one of my best journalists? Is he going to have to not work as much? What are we going to be losing on this? And what Will wanted to ask me was, he said, me and Bella want to do a podcast. We don't know how to do a podcast, but we want to do one in hopes that it will help other people who are in the same situation as us. And I was like, wow. That's the kind of commitment you have with reporters and editors in small newspapers. Between November 2017 and September 2020, the couple produced 26 podcasts. One of my favorite was right before Thanksgiving. And they used to just sit on the couch, like the picture I showed you before, and they would just talk like any old couple and talk about things going on in their lives. And Will kept trying to steer the conversation back to Thanksgiving and what they had to be thankful for. But Bella, she can be feisty, and she was in a mood, and she said, no, I want to talk about what happened at the supermarket. She had been checking out for groceries, and she tried to use her PIN number to check out and pay for the groceries, and the PIN number wouldn't work. And no matter how many times she tried, it wouldn't work. And she was getting more and more angry. And Will quietly said, Bella, that was the Alzheimer's. And she said, no, it wasn't. It wasn't. You changed the PIN number. I know what my PIN number is. You screwed it up. He said, no, Bella, it was the Alzheimer's. And she said, no, it wasn't. And listen, buddy, you better just get your shit together. But that's the kind of tone they set in those broadcasts. Will wrote, we wonder how long before things get worse, but if and when more changes happen, will they be worse, or will we be able to find our connection still, despite the different circumstances? Will there be something deeper in what we share? Witnessing the decline of your beloved companion, as I and many other caregivers do, is emotional torture administered in a few drops of bitterness each day. That may be as heartbreaking a paragraph as I've ever read. I stumbled across this story the other day. I've been working on a second volume of my columns, and I call it The Tale of the Unidentified Jogger. And I played basketball at the YMCA, and I was coming back from basketball. It was a February day, and I got out of my car, and this was right around, I think, 2017. And, it was kind of, things were kind of going bad. We were being called the fake news. We were being called the enemies of the people. And this guy, kind of an overweight guy, jogs by, and he yells out to me, "Thanks for the newspaper." Well, we can be a cynical lot in newspapers. And I was like, is he being sarcastic? Is he, what's he mean by that? And I almost wanted to run after him. And he kept going down. And then he kind of turned his head around and said, "Thanks for what you do." And now I'm like, well, that didn't sound sarcastic at all. And I went back into the newspaper office. And I started telling everybody this story, and they didn't seem that interested in it. But I ended up writing a column about it and my experience of the unidentified jogger. And we printed it, and a couple days later, I get an email from a guy named Bill Herman, who lives right down the street from the newspaper. South Glens Falls math teacher with 2 kids. And he wrote to me, "I really do value having a daily newspaper. As a parent of a senior in high school and an 8th grader, the paper plays a role in my kids' education. It's sitting on the table when they come down for breakfast in the morning. Sure, they look at the comics and the sports too, but they see the front page too. It is valuable to our family. I'm a bit saddened and shocked when I hear many folks do not get a paper. It seems to me once someone gets their news online, they start to lose touch with their community and are more susceptible to reading and sharing questionable content. The trend is not only sad, it is dangerous." Consider that's 5 years ago. This guy was way ahead of his time. In fact, I think I said to him at the time, I said, where did a math teacher learn to write so well? And then he wrote, "Seeing our local newspaper editor is a big deal for me. Not exactly a superhero, but pretty close." Well, that was very nice, but the last thing I'm going to believe is that I'm a superhero. But certainly some of the work our editors and publishers did would qualify. As you heard before, when I retired in 2020, Mayor Dan Hall in Glens Falls declared it Ken Tingley Day. I thought this was going to be an annual event. I thought there might be a parade. I had really high hopes. But apparently it was just a one-shot deal. So my wife, Jillian, made this sign for me. And we went downtown that day. And we walked downtown with me waving my silly sign. And we stopped it all and took all these pictures. And we were running right through the middle of Glen Street. And this guy in a park bench said to me, "Who the hell is Ken Tingley?" So I think I was retiring at the right time. So thank you very much. I hope you'll support your local newspaper and your local media, and it's been great talking to you. Thank you.
Listen to this. And this is from our club.
Oh, thank you very much.
And actually, I am from the Press Republican, and thank you for telling all these folks what we do.
Exactly. Well, good. I don't know if you want to do Q&A or not.
Yeah, well, anyone who has questions for Ken, please see him after the meeting.